This is the head off a 900 Supersport, 97 model carby bike. I'm just going to pull it apart. Thought I'd do a video. So first I pull the rocker covers off and the cam end cap. Loosen all the bolts. The head's sitting on a little stand that I use for these engines. It's got spacing on the little posts there to take the big block and the 996 style. I've got a different one that I use for the small block, like a 750 head, which I did the other day. Okay, so they're all loose. Being the vertical head, there's a bit of oil left in the exhaust rocker cover side. I keep all my stuff when I pull heads apart. I pulled the horizontal one apart earlier. Everything generic or anything sort of big goes in this one with an O and a V, horizontal and vertical. And all the individual valve bits go in tubs with horizontal inlet, horizontal exhaust, vertical inlet, vertical exhaust. Just makes it easier to keep it all collated that way. These cam end caps have a paper gasket behind them. Sometimes they're a bit stuck. You just tap them, they come off. Very occasionally they get gooped on or something and they can be quite hard to get off. They should just be a dry paper gasket. This is the cam end cap. It's got a bearing here that's got the cover in it still. The other side of the bearing hasn't got a seal in it, and so that gets fed oil through the head in there, and that fills this cavity up behind the bearing. Then the oil comes out the center and goes in the center of the cam and sprays out of the cam. On the end of the cam there's a little washer here, which is a shim. I'm guessing it's possibly there to keep the bearing in the cover when it all gets hot and expands, because there's oil pressure behind the bearing. Maybe you might move it around a bit. But I've found that on a lot of engines I've done the last few years, you put that shim in, you put this cap on when you're reassembling it, torque the bolts up, and all of a sudden the cam's got a heap of drag on it. And I think possibly the gaskets that they supply have just got a bit thinner, and it's enough to make this too far in. I've started using the California Cycle Works gaskets, which I think is a G2310. It's a bit thicker than what the Ducati ones are, and it seems to work fine with them. Let's get rid of the old gasket. I'll take the opening rocker clips out, and that's the inlet, vertical inlet. Slide the rocker across, pull the opening shim off. I just tend to take anything that can fall out as I'm moving it around. I'll take off now just to get it out of the way. Spin it around the other side to the exhaust. Again, pull the opening rocker locating clip out. Now we can slide both the opening rockers across. Shim out of the way. And now I like to take the cam out you can see the cam pulley surrounds have all failed, the rubber's all failed, which is what happens over time. Then I've got to undo the pulley nut. Now this pulley nut will be Loctited on because I've done the cam timing on this bike previously. Tools to hold the pulleys. This is the original tool, which has got the 2 prongs on it. And the 2 prongs, there's 4 holes in the pulley. 2 of the holes have a 6mm thread and 2 of them are just holes. So the 2 that are just holes are the ones that you put the holding tool in. And then you use socket like so. Goes inside there. Other tools you can use if you get them. I bought this off eBay, I think, somewhere a while ago, and I can't remember where I got it. I can't find it again since, but this one's a really nice tool because it goes around the outside and it does fit on the vertical with its wraparound pulley cover. On the horizontal, the pulley's much more exposed. So you can put that on there, and then you can use a tool like this if you like. This is a much more stable tool because the 4 prongs have backing, whereas on one of these ones, the 4 prongs don't have that much support and they do bend. So it depends which one you want to go for, which one you can find. If you wanted to, knowing the nut's Loctited on, you could put a bit of heat on it. It's up to you. Yeah. They're meant to be torqued to 72 Newton meters, I think, so they are fairly tight. If they're factory originals from the mid-90s, they might not be that tight. And they definitely won't be Loctited if they're original. Yeah, these are spec'd as a single-use nut. I know a lot of people reuse them, Loctite them and reuse them. On customer bikes, I always replace them just out of professional paranoia. Okay, when you pull the pulley off, I know there's an offset key in this one. So if you are pulling things apart, just take the time to make sure if there is one there, you can take it out in the situation that it was. But on these engines, you'd pretty much always be advancing the cams anyway. Oops, and I put it in the wrong spot. I put it in the horizontal spot, not the vertical spot. Let's see if I can find it. Where did it go? Sometimes I forget what I'm doing when I'm talking. So, there's the pulley backing plate in there as well. And there's also a seal runner on the cam, but we'll get to that in a minute. Oops, that bolt was actually loose. These bolts you can't really see when it's all assembled, so they don't ever really get checked. And I have seen a few loose over the years. I remember once seeing one that was on 1,000 was actually coming out a bit. It was causing drag on the cam. We couldn't work out what was wrong with it. Turns out one of these was coming out and rubbing on the backing plate. That one's had it. The horizontal one was similar. This bike's done about 47,000 Ks, so it hasn't done a lot of kilometres over what, 25 years? Next, I'll just pull the cam out, and the cam will just slide out with the opening rockers out of the way. The cam will just slide out. There you go, and it's out. That's the seal runner. And on the cam, just have a look at it, make sure it's got no damage on it. It looks pretty fine. There is a shim in here. You can find it. There it is. And this shim sits on the cam like so. They always have one. It's not actually a shim to space it, it's just something that sits there against the bearing, just how they are. Okay, now we'll pull the shims out, closing shim, so just pull the collets out. Collets, just keep the collets within the same spot so they go back in the same valve, but you just need to work out later where they actually were. The valve's trying to fall out. Again, just pull the collets out, put them in the appropriate box. Just push the valve out. Sometimes the valves will have a ridge that the collets have made on it, and they can be a bit hard to get out. Valve stem seals. We're going to pull the rockers out. Now the rocker shafts can sometimes be super easy to get out, in which case I'll just slide out like this one is. And on these opening rockers that slide across, there's some shims here. There's at least 2, sometimes 3. Slide that out. Oh, it's stuck there. So those 2 shims, these 2 shims, there's one either side of the clip is why they're there, and sometimes there's a 3rd shim there, I guess, to take up side float. Check the rocker, make sure the chrome's okay. Occasionally you see a 2-valve rocker with some wear there. Make sure the valve end isn't really worn. That one. Oops. Too many things in my hands. Vertical exhaust. Closer can be a little bit harder to get out. There's a couple of ways you can do it. Slide hammer, it's an M5 thread on the end. You screw in there. Or you can use a pulling tool like this. Again, this screws in here, and then it pulls the pin out into the sleeve. This is the more time-consuming one, but it's the more gentle one. Sometimes these pins can be really tight, so you want to make sure you wind the tool in a fair way, just to make sure you get good thread purchase, because if you're going to really pull hard or bang with a slide hammer, you might need the strength, but this one probably would have come out with my hands. Just pulling out. On the closing rockers, there is a shim on each side. It's usually a thick 2mm shim. Sometimes there might be a thin shim there as well, or sometimes there might be a whole lot of shims stacked up that are a little bit less than 2mm, because 2mm was too much. But hopefully, usually, they're just a single 2mm shim. And I always check that when I'm putting it back together again, just to make sure that with the 2mm shim the valve's centered. Sometimes I'll might end up with a 0.1 or a 0.2mm shim on one side, just to take up the side float to get the rocker where you want it over the valve. It's not going to come out. So let's pull it out. There we go. It's our rocker, and there's a thin shim there. Now 2 thicker ones. There's one of them, the 2mm shim, which is nice and thick. The other one there it is. So there was a thin shim on this side as well, but when you're reassembling it, I would always just put the rocker in without the spring on it, and with the valve in, you can just look down the side of the valve and make sure the rocker's not floating too much and that it's centered. Check the chrome pad, which is fine. That's the inlet. Might be able to just pull these ones out. Oops. There's only two on the opening rocker. Chrome pad's okay. There we go. I was going to say the closing rockers don't usually go anywhere when you pull the pin out, but that one did. Doesn't appear to have been any little shims there. Sometimes you pull them out and there wasn't any shims, but when you put it back together again you might shim it a little bit. It's just a case of seeing what it's like and what you think it needs. Chrome pad's fine. And that's pretty much stripped. It's going to go away and get 1mm oversize inlet valve fitted and supporting done. I don't usually replace the bearings in them because the bearings in these things just last forever. I don't think I've ever actually replaced a failed bearing in one. So that's it, stripped enough to go out. When this head came off, you could see underneath it here, there's a different look to the sealing face. These engines don't use head gaskets, so the cylinder and the cylinder head just butt against each other. And this shiny section here is where the head and cylinder touch. And you can see here that the appearance is a little bit mottled, and that's where it's been not sealing properly. And on these engines, all the 2-valve engines, if you've got a bit of a leak there, it will push oil out of the combustion chamber. Pesos were really bad for it. ST2s do it at about 60, 70,000 Ks. I've seen a few air-cooled engines do it. Not a great deal of them, but certainly something to be aware of. And when you lift the head off, you'll usually see it straight away because there'll be oil there. And there was oil across there when I pulled it off. And around here, it was just nice and shiny. The holes in the head, that's oil return from the rocker cavity. That's an oil return. The vertical has 2 oil returns. Horizontal only has 1 at the back on the exhaust. And that's the oil feed to the heads, which is fed pressurized oil through the cylinder into there, and it's drilled across this passage here, comes across, and then it comes out there into the cam end cap. And that's the head.